Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsa-chanūramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. So we have been studying the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which specializes in meditation. Meditation for what? Meditation for self-realization or realization of our nature as Brahman. And we were on verse number 27 we had finished, and I think we're going to go on to 29 onwards. So till now, Krishna has taught Arjuna the method of meditation, all the practical details. First of all, of course, the moral, ethical preparation given by karma yoga, and then, how to sit, the posture, the breathing, where to keep your eyes, and then the withdrawal of the senses, and focus, and then deepening the meditation up to samadhi. And that leads to that intuitive moment of realization that I am the Atman. Now, in the 28th verse, Krishna says, verse number 28, chapter 6. Yuñjann evaṁ sadātmānaṁ yogī vigata-kalmaṣhaḥ sukhena brahma-sansparśham atyantaṁ sukham aśhnute. The yogi, who is entirely free from taint, constantly controlling the mind, thus attains easily the infinite bliss of union with Brahman. Yuñjann evaṁ, practicing in this way. Which way? The way which has been taught till now. Sadātmānaṁ, all the time in the sense of continuously, systematically giving it some effort for a long period of time. Vigata-kalmaṣhaḥ, purified. So this is stressed again and again. This is very important. The moral and ethical practices which leads to a sattvic state of mind, a pure state of mind, without which these things are not possible. Neither deep meditation is possible, nor genuine love of God is possible, and let alone that enlightenment, I am Brahman. These are not possible. One senior Swami gave us an ancient example that without purification of mind, without the sufficient preparation, when one engages in Vedanta, one may actually feel that I've got it, I've understood what's being taught. But how do I know whether it's real or not? The test is very simple. Are you getting the result? Does it take you across sorrow? Has it taken you beyond samsara? Are you really, can you honestly claim that you do not have suffering in your life? Can you honestly claim that you are completely at peace with everything? One can always take a look at oneself, one's own inner state. So what is that feeling that I've got it? So it's an ancient example. This Swami Pitambarananda, is an old Swami, he told us that it's like a man sitting under a mango tree near like a pool. There's a mango tree, and reflected in the pool, he sees a mango, and he says, so this is what is eating the mango. No, you haven't even seen it, let alone touch it, nor smelt it, nor tasted it, let alone eating it completely. So you're just seeing a reflection of the mango, and then it remains to be seen and touched and savored and then eaten and nourished. So that is the extent of enlightenment, or the extent of realization. This is the difference. And the difference is not so much in technique, it's not so much in philosophy, it's basically the purification of the mind. Vigata-kalmaṣhaḥ, purifying the mind. Sukhena, easily. So without the purification of mind, it's a terrible struggle. With sufficient purification, sufficient purity of mind, giving up desires, a contentment regarding the world, genuine love of God arises, or genuine inquiry into Brahman arises. And that person can, spiritual life becomes easier for that person. Brahma-sansparśham literally means the touch of Brahman. Now, from an Advaitic perspective, there is of course no touch of Brahman. You are Brahman. That's what you realize. Atyantaṁ sukham aśhnute, attains limitless bliss. What is this limitless bliss? We have discussed this earlier. The Vishayananda, Bhajanananda, and Brahmananda, the Ananda which comes from contact with sense objects, the joy of spiritual life, of renunciation, of devotion, of meditation, of Vedantic inquiry, and selfless service. So this is Bhajanananda. And finally, beyond all of this is Brahmananda, the bliss that is Brahman itself. It's not another kind of bliss, but it is Brahman. So this is the result. The nature of this illumination is now given in the next verse, 29th verse. What is the nature of this? So Sri Krishna never tires of coming back to this theme, and it's a magnificent verse. Basically, this is what I will dwell on for the rest of today's class. Let me chant it and we'll see why it's so great. 29th verse. Sarva-bhūta-stham ātmānaṁ sarva-bhūtāni chātmani īkṣhate yoga-yuktātmā sarvatra sama-darśhanaḥ. What does it mean? That man whose mind is absorbed in yoga and who sees the same Brahman everywhere, sees the self in all beings and all beings in the self. So the self in all beings and all beings in the self. This is a phrase which we come across time and again across the Vedantic texts, right from the Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita and other places also. It's scattered, but this very phrase, it comes multiple times. Sarva-bhūta-stham ātmānaṁ, the self in all beings and all beings in the self. Just examples. Most famous example, of course, the first earliest one we get is from the Isha Upanishad, the famous Isha Upanishad, which starts off with that very famous mantra, Ishavasyam idam sarvam, yatkincha jagatyam jagat. In everything that moves and does not move, in all beings, in everything, that entity that exists, God alone pervades everything, or you have to see God in everything. So that is the famous first line of the first mantra of the Isha Upanishad. Mahatma Gandhi famously said that if all of Hinduism were to disappear and just this first line of the first mantra of this one Upanishad remained, all of Hinduism would remain. So that's the first one, but there are other famous mantras there, which I will chant to you now. This is from the Isha Upanishad, which says exactly what we read in the Gita just now. What does it say? It says, the sixth and the seventh mantras of the Isha Upanishad. Yastu sarvāni bhūtānyātmaņevaṁ nupashyati sarva-bhūteshu chātmānaṁ tato na vijugupsate. He who sees all beings in the self and the self in all beings feels no hatred by virtue of that realization. Seventh mantra. Yasmin sarvāni bhūtānyātmeva vibhūdvijanatah. Sorry. Yasmin sarvāni bhūtānyātmeva bhūdvijanatah tatra ko moha kashoka ekatvam anupashyatah. When to that one of realization all beings become the very self, then what delusion and what sorrow can there be for that seer of oneness? Or in another way, translated, in the self, capital S, of the one who is realized, in which all beings become the self, what delusion and what sorrow can remain for that seer of oneness? More or less the same thing. So you see, Isha Upanishad says exactly what we just read. Then, a new verse from the Manusmriti. And that's interesting. I just came across it today. The 12th chapter, the last chapter actually, of the Manusmriti, the 91st verse of the 12th chapter. Yes. Sarva-bhūteshu chātmānaṁ, sarva-bhūtāni chātmani, samam-paśhyan ātmā-yājī, swarājyam adhigacchati. The Atma-yaji, which means the self-sacrificer, we'll see what that means later, who sees the self in all beings and all beings in the self, by that realization, sees the sameness everywhere, oneness everywhere, and attains or realizes his own empire. Swarajyam adhigacchati. You realize you attain to your own empire. All right, we'll see that a little later. Basically, what does it mean? You see, sarva-bhūta-stham ātmānaṁ, sarva-bhūtāni chātmani. To see the self in all beings and all beings in the self. Now notice the very first thing, it's counterintuitive. Where do I find myself? Only in myself, here. And everybody is not myself. You are all not myself. Everybody is different from me. I am separate from everybody else. The moment I say sarva-bhūta-stham ātmānaṁ, in all beings and all living beings, I find myself. This distinction between I and the other is erased. Swami Virajananda, beautifully, he was the president of our order, he beautifully says, this body and this world are revealed to me at once. Either I am all of it or none of it. This is the meaning of this phrase, actually. So when I say I find myself in all beings, in that case, this whole distinction of I and the other, I and you, this is I and this is mine, and that's you and that's yours. This distinction disappears. This is the first thing that we get here, that you see an underlying oneness. And this is the Sankhyan realization, not Sankhyan, sorry. This is the realization that I am not the body, not the mind, I am this pure consciousness. And this pure consciousness alone is the same in all beings. In 13th chapter, Krishna will say, kshetragyam chapi mam vidhi sarva kshetrishu bharata. In all these fields, there is the knower of the field. In each body and mind, the knower, you, the one you feel yourself. In all these fields, the knower of the field is actually one. The fields are different, bodies are different, minds are different, but behind them there is one knower of the field. So this is the first meaning, that the distinction between I and you, I and mine and everything else is other than this. This distinction disappears. I am one in all beings. But further, sarva-bhūtāni chātmani, all beings are in me. This means the distinction between, and I'll explain this, technically it is called adhisthana and adhyastha. The distinction is not there. It's not like there are two things, there's one reality, underlying reality, and there is something else separate, a world and other beings. There's one consciousness, and then everything else is separate from it. The universe is separate, material beings are separate, our bodies are separate, there are millions of bodies and minds. No, all of them are nothing but this underlying reality. It erases the distinction between the pot and the clay, between the ornament and the gold. We must understand what gold is, to see the one reality underlying all ornaments. But then we must also see all the ornaments are not different from this gold. First of all, what did you do? Gold is not a bracelet. Gold is not a necklace. Gold is not a ring. Water is not a wave or a bubble or a foam or surf. You know what water is. You know what gold is. Having discovered that, the one reality underlying all waves, all surf and all foam, having discovered that, you realize that waves, surf, foam are nothing but water. It's one reality. You realize that the necklace and bracelet and ring are nothing but gold. It's one reality. A variety of pots and jars, they are nothing but clay. It's one reality. First, you must separate, and then you see the oneness. In Sanskrit, this is called adhisthana and adhyastha. The ground or the foundation and the appearance, they are one and the same thing. Let me go back to the Manusmriti verse. It's very interesting. Atma-yaji, it says, Atma-yaji, yaji means the sacrificer, the one who does Vedic sacrifices, yajna. So that one sees all beings, sees this all beings in the self and the self in all beings, and sees oneness and realizes his own empire. That's the beautiful way of Swarajya, beautiful way of expressing liberation, enlightenment. So what is this self-sacrificer? The conventional meaning, of course, in the Vedic context is people performed religious rituals. We have seen this in the Katha Upanishad. It's all about those rituals. We were studying all that. A fire is lit, a fire altar is built according to specifications. A sacred fire is lit. There are priests who chant the mantras. Offerings are poured into the mantras, and there is a particular intention behind it. The good karma generated from this will give me my desired object, so on. This is external yajna or external fire sacrifice. But there must come a time when this devout Vedic fire sacrificer, the religious person of those days, when this person would do it internally. So instead of an external fire altar and a fire being lit, so within oneself, one would visualize the entire thing. That's a more advanced practice. And that has carried over to modern Hinduism. You have an elaborate puja. There's a deity and there are offerings and there are flowers and fruits and incense. Mantras are chanted. You show the various hand symbols, the mudras, and so on. An elaborate puja is done. But there's also manasa puja, mental worship, where everything is visualized. Offerings are visualized, the deity is visualized, the lotus in the heart is visualized, the whole thing is mental. So that's the preliminary meaning of the sacrifice or the ritual being performed internally in one's mind. That's called sacrifice within oneself. But that's not what is meant here. This is higher. This is philosophical. This is metaphysical. This is very deep. What is meant here is we are pure consciousness. And now, with the appearance of a mind and a body, this pure consciousness reflected in the mind as the reflected consciousness now identifies itself as a person. When this person realizes, I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, I am the witness consciousness. When this person realizes, Shankaracharya sings, Mano buddhi ahankara chittani naham, I'm not the mind, not the intellect, not the memory, not even the ego. Then what am I? Chidananda rupaha shivoham, shivoham. I am of the nature of pure consciousness. I am Shiva, I am Shiva. This realization, where you sacrifice this apparent self into the real self, where you merge this, I thought I was this person. I merge my individuality or my reality back to the pure consciousness. This is called Atma-yaji. So basically, the realization, I am not this person. I am the witness of this person. I am not this limited being. I am the awareness which is appearing as this limited being. Just this realization itself is called the self-sacrifice. You sacrifice the lower self, the apparent self, the emergent self back into the background, the ground of this, what Eckhart calls, Meister Eckhart calls the ground of my soul, back into that. And how do you merge it back? By understanding, by realizing. This is called Atma-yaji. And when he does this, what happens? You see, our likes and dislikes, our fears, psychologically, this is what roots us in samsara. I am this body, and I and mine, this is my personality. And now there are things which I want. And there is desire. There are things and people and situations which I'm scared of, which I dislike. there is repulsion, dvesha, so raga and dvesha. And overall, behind it all is fear. Fear is fundamental to the human psyche. Fear of many, many things. From fear of physical death to subtle things, fear of being insulted, fear of losing health, fear, whatever, all sorts of fears, huge range of fears. They give rise to samsara, and modern psychologists agreed entirely. Now, what this Atma-yaji does is, this is very beautiful, that the object of attraction and the attraction are merged back into pure awareness. Behind the attraction and the object of attraction is pure awareness. Is in awareness only you become aware of that cookie. In awareness only you become aware of the desire for the cookie. If you focus back from the cookie and the desire for the cookie into the awareness which is shining on that, you have merged the cookie and the desire for the cookie back into the awareness. It is in awareness only that I become aware of something that I dislike or someone I dislike. And in that awareness only, the feeling of dislike, dvesha, arises. When I realize the light in which that disliked object is shining and the dislike or the hatred is shining, that is called merging the object, dvesha, vishaya, and the dislike, dvesha, back into consciousness. When you do this, and because I am not the little person, there's nothing that I've got to be afraid of. I, the awareness, I'm not subject to birth, I'm not subject to aging, not subject to death. I am not subject to the passing moods, fancies, depressions, miseries of the mind. I illumine all of them, I reveal all of them, but I am not tainted by them. So fear goes away. I am beyond fear. In fact, enlightenment, one of the descriptions of enlightenment is fearlessness. When the Emperor Janaka attained enlightenment, his master told him, Abhayang vai praptosi Janaka. O Emperor Janaka, you have attained fearlessness. He didn't say you have attained Brahman, you are now enlightened, self-realized, whatever. You have attained fearlessness. So the Atma-yaji is free of raga, dvesha, and bhaya, of the attractions and the repulsions and the fear which characterizes samsara. This is freedom. Freedom from samsara. Then the next one I wanted to say was, okay, in the Gita itself, the result of this is mentioned, of seeing all beings in the self and the self in all beings. You see here itself, we will do these verses later, but 31st verse, if you see, chapter 6, 31st, but just 2 verses ahead, it says, Sarvatha vartamanopi sa yogi mai vartate. What is the result of this realization? Whatever be the condition, whether you are in a hospital bed and dying at an old age, or sitting in meditation, giving up the body, or somebody dies in an accident, or in the midst of plenty and fame, and or in poverty and forgotten, whatever be the condition, even physically in a coma, body is in a coma, mind is shut down, even that condition, whatever is always in me. He says, this yogi is always in me. In me means you are always Brahman. This is one result. And the same thing in the 13th chapter, it says, in chapter 13, verse 23, chapter 13, it says, Sarvatha vartamanopi nasa bhuyo vijayate. Being Brahman in whatever condition, the result is this person will never be born again. Will never be born again. So whatever be the condition, as far as the world is concerned, as far as the body and mind is concerned, you are Brahman. This is called Jivan Mukti. In the while living, in this life, here itself. And the next thing is, after death, this one is never born again. This is called Videha Mukti. The meaning of these two, Jivan Mukti is liberated while living. Videha Mukti is freedom, the bodiless freedom. That means not to be born, not being born again. These are said to be the two results of liberation, of enlightenment. I mean, it's the same thing. You are Brahman, But practically, it looks like these two things. As long as the body is there, this person is an enlightened person, liberated by living this. One second. While the other one is, after the death of this body, this is the last life. So this person will never be born in a limited, as an individual again. This is called moksha. So while living, always, whatever the condition of life, you are Brahman. And after the death of this body, you are not born again. So this is the result. Jivan mukti, videha mukti. Then another point I wanted to mention was, if this is not realized, this means I am that reality in all beings, number one, and all beings are appearances in me. If you put them together, it becomes oneness. I'll repeat that. I am the same in all beings. That is one. And those all beings, the moment I say all beings, there's a tinge of difference there. There are so many bodies and so many minds and so many non-living things. What are they? They are nothing other than I. I alone appear as that. So this is oneness. Now, suppose this is not there, contrast it with our pre-enlightenment stage, our ordinary stage, the stage of samsara. What happens? There's no oneness. Their sat, existence, is an other to you. Chit, consciousness, is an other to you. Ananda, bliss, is an other. When existence, sat, is an other, it's not me, then I'm dependent. I am dependent on life and death. Then I struggle to live in this body. And I'm terrified of death because my existence depends on the other, on the continued existence of the body, on the continued existence of the mind. This quest for physical immortality, quest for uploading our mind to the cloud or whatever it is. What is this? What does this show? It shows that I'm terribly dependent for my existence on something else. But when you are existence itself, you don't depend on something else. You are immortal. Your existence is assured because you are being. You are isness. Chit, consciousness, that there is this conscious being called God. If it is other than my consciousness, if it is a separate consciousness, then it's imagination. Even the very idea that there are so many conscious beings here, it's something that we infer. That as I am conscious clearly within myself, all these people here looking at me through Zoom, they also must be conscious unless they are zombies. So it's imagined. And so there is a supreme conscious being called God, it's still imagined. If chit or consciousness is an other, if ananda, bliss, is an other, it's not you, then you are needy. You become needy. I am going around with a begging bowl in the world, give me some happiness, give me some bliss, give me some joy. Whereas what this one says is that joy is your very nature. That chit or consciousness is you. And that existence, being, is you. It can never be lost. You are neither born nor will you ever die. Consciousness is ever revealed. You don't have to imagine it. It is that which powers all imagination, reveals everything. So it's continuously blazing forth right now. And bliss, we don't have to go around in the world begging from money or little appreciation, little attention, little relationship, little power, status for happiness. No. So this is the thing, the distinction between othering and oneness. And this is the teaching of oneness. Okay, big point. So I was reading this great Swami Akhandananda Saraswati, who lived in the mid-20th century and after that also. His teachings are mostly in Hindi and Sanskrit. So he says in his commentary on this verse, he says that this sarva-bhūta-stham ātmānaṁ, sarva-bhūtāni chātmani, this is a mahavakya. What is a mahavakya? This is equivalent to our mahavakya. What is mahavakya? Those great sentences you find in the Upanishads which sum up the entirety of Vedanta. That thou art, tattvamasi. I am Brahman, aham brahmasmi. Like that. When you say sarva-bhūta-stham ātmānaṁ, what does it mean? So how is this a Mahavakya? Let's go into it. Sarva-bhūta-stham ātmānaṁ is you or I, my real nature, your real nature. And sarva-bhūtāni chātmani, all beings in the self, that is God's real nature. And the two are one and the same. This is how it's a Mahavakya. Let's go into this, we will see. So sarva-bhūta-stham ātmānaṁ, in all beings, there is the Atman, the self. The moment you say the word bhuta, that's etymologically, it means an entity which comes into being. It's born and it arises, it's produced. It exists for some time, then it dies or it's destroyed. That's a bhuta. And they are many in number. That's why sarva, many bhutas. They're all different from each other. They're all different from each other. They come and go. They're born, they exist, they play around and they disappear. In all this changing multitude, there is one underlying unchanging reality. It is this one consciousness in all beings. See, when we investigate ourselves, what are we basically? You can't say this is body. No, more fundamental is the fact that we are basically experience. Think about it this way. The most general description that we can give about ourselves is anubhuti, experience. Is it not so? You say, no, I'm this body. No, and this body is having an experience. No, this body is revealed to you in experience. It's an experience for you, this body. Thoughts, I am this person. That's an experience for you, being this person. Thoughts, emotions, there's an experience. So what is an experience? An experience is consciousness plus an object. Consciousness plus an object. Think about it. You are awareness and an object comes up in you. And then the two come together, it's called an experience. It's like light and an object. There is light all around. Suddenly an object comes, it reflects light. You see something. Similarly, consciousness like a light is there always. You are that. Then an object comes. What's an object? A sight, a smell, a taste, a thought, an emotion, a memory, a desire. You have an experience. You say, I see, I hear, I smell, I taste, I touch, I think, I remember, I desire, I understand. So consciousness plus object is experience, and our life is only a series of experiences. Now see, in all these experiences, thoughts come and go. Consciousness is the same. Behind every thought is the same consciousness. Memories arise and disappear. They fade away sometimes, distorted sometimes. You remember, or sometimes you cannot recall. Behind it all is behind the functioning of the memory is consciousness. Behind the keen memory is consciousness. And behind the fading memory, loss of recall, is consciousness. Consciousness does not become keen or dulled. It reveals the keen memory or the dulled memory. Behind emotions, all kinds of emotions, happy and sad, angry and peaceful, every kind of emotional state, there must be awareness. Behind all actions, walking, talking, eating, cooking, jogging, whatever you're doing, New York Marathon is going to come. So the huge preparations are going on here in Central Park. So on Sunday, New York Marathon. So you're jogging, in marathon, you're running, in awareness. It has to be in awareness. Behind all actions, behind waking, dreaming, even deep sleep, is that one awareness, one consciousness. This one consciousness, sarva-bhūta-stham ātmānaṁ. In all beings, it is the same consciousness. You might say, in all my states, there's the same consciousness. How do I know it's the same in you? Because the consciousness in itself has no difference. The bodies are different, minds are different, but consciousness is not different. This is the argument of Advaita against Sankhya. Anyway, so one consciousness in all beings, this is called sarva-bhūta-stham ātmānaṁ. Bhuta, born, existing, dying. Sarva, difference, many difference. When you use the Sanskrit word stha, it means it is unchangeably, one and unchangeably, beyond any possibility of change. So that one consciousness, one awareness, whatever you call it, in the midst of the birth, existence, and deaths of all entities, in the midst of the variety of those entities. This is sarva-bhūta-stham chātmani. Now, going further, all these beings, all these bodies, minds, objects, universes, objects which give us experience, where are these objects? In which screen is this movie playing? Here is the master stroke. It is in the same consciousness. It is in you. And look at it in your experience. It's a fact. You look at it in your experience. Where are the objects that you experience? What do I mean by this is this object external, this book? It's an object. It gives me an experience. What experience? I see this book. Now, is this object outside my awareness or in my awareness? What I mean is, my awareness is there, book is there, like the light. In a sense, this book is outside the light because the light can exist without the book and the book can exist without the light. They're separate things. Light falls on the book and reveals it. So is my consciousness like that? Or is this book internal to my consciousness? What I mean is, do I have any sense of there was a book outside and here was my consciousness. Now the book has entered my consciousness. No. There is no, where is the limit of my consciousness? Where is the boundary of my awareness? Whatever I'm aware of, there is no boundary there. You say, no, there is a boundary. You cannot see outside your room, Swami. But I cannot see outside my room, but I'm aware. Here is the limit of my sight and there is something beyond this limit of my sight. That's still within my awareness as the great unknown. It's not within my sight. That's why Vedanta makes a distinction between knower and consciousness, knowing and awareness. Pramata and Chaitanya. This difference is made. So there are things which are known and things which are unknown. Vedanta never suggests that if something you don't know does not exist. No. What Vedanta suggests is everything exists in awareness. Some of it is known and a vast amount of it is unknown. When awareness deploys the mind and the instruments of knowledge, it knows something. Otherwise, everything is presented to that awareness as a general mass of the unknown. But other than awareness, there's no limit to this awareness. There's no margin to this awareness. So all the beings, not only is awareness one and the same in all beings, but all of these beings are in awareness, are indistinguishable from awareness, are appearances of awareness. 3 stages. All beings in this universe are presented to you, the awareness, in you, the awareness, as nothing but you, the awareness. It appears as different from you. None of these things appear as awareness, but they appear as computers, books, people, but they are nothing other than this awareness shining forth as all these things. Therefore, all beings are in awareness means all beings are nothing other than the awareness. They're not, you don't literally say all beings are awareness. It doesn't seem so. It doesn't seem very logical to say that. But they're nothing other than awareness can be logically proved. It can be proved logically. It can be proved. It can be tracked in our own experience. I'm using words carefully here. Now put it together. You are the one consciousness in all beings. This is your real nature. And all beings, this entire universe is an appearance in consciousness. That one consciousness in which all beings are appearing, and you, the consciousness behind this body, mind, all experiences, is one consciousness. This is the meaning of aham brahmasmi, or that thou art. If you just remain with I am the consciousness which is illumining all the activities in this body and mind, that's Sankhya. That's where drig drishya viveka, the separation of the seer and the seen, takes you up to that much. But what about this vast universe? This universe is an appearance in consciousness. So this cosmos, take the example of our dreams. This is a good example. Suppose I'm walking around in my dream. I don't know it's a dream. I think I'm just taking a walk in the park. Here is the park. Here are people. Here are carriages, horse carriages. And so I was amazed to see rickshaws in New York, So there are rickshaws. But the rickshaws here are all for rich people. So they charge you $4.99 per person per minute. So if you take a So $5, let's say. Two people sit and go in a rickshaw for 30 minutes. You get charged $300, which is more than the price you paid for the air ticket to come into Manhattan in the first place from many places in USA. So all of these are there. I'm seeing all of them now, and I also feel I am a person here and I'm aware. But when I wake up, I realize that person I felt and the awareness there, and all those things that person was seeing in the dream, the whole thing was an appearance in me, the dreamer. That's what I realized. Exactly like that. Everything that you see here and you yourself are this one consciousness. This is the meaning of aham brahmasmi tatvamasi. That's why that Swami called it a mahavakya. When you say sarva-bhūta-stham ātmānaṁ, in all changing multifarious beings, one consciousness. And all changing multifarious beings in that one consciousness, not distinguishable from that one consciousness. So you have got oneness. That's why it's a mahavakya. It does not stop with Sankhya. It does not stop with the realization of one consciousness within. Then he goes on, īkṣhate yoga-yuktātmā sarvatra sama-darśhanaḥ. īkṣhate, the Sanskrit word īkṣhate means sees, realizes. Realizes this person who is yoga, two words are used, yoga-yukta, who is in yoga, and sarvatra sama-darśhanaḥ, seeing the same in everything. These two are the two states. Samadhi, being in samadhi. So the mind, this is the samadhi which Krishna has been teaching Arjuna all throughout in the 6th chapter. Being in samadhi, shutting down the senses, withdrawing inwards, focusing, emptying the mind and becoming aware of awareness. I am the self. Chidananda Rupa Shivoham. Staying with that. Mind gets absorbed in samadhi, like the flame, which unflickering flame of a lamp in a windless place. In that state, Brahman and Brahman alone, that infinite consciousness alone, but objectless. And then he says, sarvatra sama-darśhanaḥ. This next word he uses is startling. Suddenly everything, sarvatra means everywhere, sama-darśhanaḥ means seeing the same. So everywhere and time and space and objects have all appeared. Now they have all appeared, and yet this person sees the same thing. Which same thing? The same realization which he had in samadhi. He sees that. Sri Ramakrishna put it very simply, that when I close my eyes, God is there, and if I open my eyes, God is not there. What kind of God would that be? So this is the same God with eyes closed, the same God with eyes open. What Ramana Maharshi called Sahaja Samadhi, the natural samadhi. So samadhi, not only just the yogic withdrawal and absorption within, but natural, with eyes open, with the mind thinking, with the body working, everywhere the same, in the midst of work. Brahmarpanam Brahmahavi, that verse, it says brahma-karma samadhina, the one who sees Brahman in all actions. That means you are acting, you're actually doing work. That there is that one reality all the time. In the midst of the active mind. It's not that the mind becomes very serene and absorbed, then you can't work. The mind is furiously active. You may be doing office work or housework or whatever it is. And yet you know it is the same reality. This is knowledge. See, here's this difference between yogic samadhi and advaitic samadhi. Yogic samadhi is control of the mind. It is generated, held on, and dissipates. It comes and it goes. Advaitic samadhi is knowledge. You realize you are Brahman, and that Brahman does not come and go, does not arise or dissipate. Once you realize what that is, it's there all the time. It's always available. Or somebody says, there's a website for that. Never not here. Very nice phrase. Never not here. It is always here. Instead of saying always here positively, it's even more accurate to say never not here. Always here somewhat means that you're always thinking about it. You may not think about it. Do you always, so I'm Sarvapriyananda. Do I always think I'm Sarvapriyananda? I'm Sarvapriyananda. I have to practice Sarvapriyananda Samadhi, otherwise the Sarvapriyananda will disappear. No. It's not going anywhere, unfortunately. So I don't have to practice samadhi on Sarvapriyananda. It's always, never not here. It's always available. So that is the meaning of sarvatra sama-darśhanaḥ. Īkṣhate yoga-yuktātmā, in samadhi and out of samadhi. Why this is important is, in the second chapter, Arjuna had asked Krishna the description of the enlightened one. He called it stabilized wisdom. It's very evocative for a non-dualist, because after getting a breakthrough, after clarity dawns, the next complaint is it's not stable. It comes and goes. I keep forgetting, or it slips away. It doesn't actually. That's still the mind. But still, when you say stabilized wisdom, that means a jivan mukta, and who is actually liberated by living. Now Arjuna asks, how does this person walk? Kim prabhashet? How does he talk? How does he interact with sense objects? And how does he meditate? So one is the meditative state, and the other one is the engaged state. In Sanskrit, samadhistha vyutthana. Samadhistha, absorbed in samadhi. Vyutthana, arising from samadhi. So the two words here refer respectively to these two. Yoga-yukta means absorbed in samadhi. And sarvatra sama-darśhanaḥ, seeing the same reality everywhere, is arising from samadhi, because everywhere, all objects are there, which means you're already active. You're seeing, you're interacting with the world, and yet you see it's the same reality. And what is that reality? It's you. This is the realization of the Advaitic Brahman. And that Swami who gave all these things he said in Hindi, very rhetorically, very powerful. It may sound shocking. It's not meant as a criticism of any particular path, but he says this. Notice what he says. He says, what kind of enlightenment have you got? Have you got this enlightenment after many spiritual practices? I, here in this body, I am free now. I have realized I am Brahman. And those people in those bodies, they have not done spiritual practices. They're far behind. They are not liberated. This is liberation with respect to one body. In Hindi, he puts it, ye bhed gyani hai ya abhed gyani hai? Is this the knower of difference or the knower of non-duality? Doesn't have the same punch in English. What have you realized? You have realized difference. You have realized duality. Notice how tiny your realization is. I am the one who has realized in this. My realization is centered around one body. In this body is the realized one, which I am. And in all those bodies are not the ignorant ones who have not done spiritual practice. They are in bondage. No, that's a body-centric realization. Mind-centric realization. I have practiced the samadhi taught by Krishna. And now in this samadhistha mind absorbed in samadhi, stilled in samadhi, this is realization, enlightenment, liberation. Depends on the mind, depends on the peace and lack of peace in one mind. No, not even that. So this teaching, all beings in the self and the self in all beings, it goes beyond that. It makes us rise above a body-centric realization, a mind-centric realization, even a samadhi-centric realization. This realization is a realization of the reality, which is always there. How is it different? After all spiritual practices, when I find that I am enlightened, realized, what will it be like? It will be like there's this one reality. It's not that those are people who are not enlightened yet, and I am so enlightened. One theologian, he says, what are the joys of heaven? What are the joys of heaven? When you go after death, you go to heaven. So the theologian said one of the joys is from heaven you look down upon the suffering people in hell and you delight in it. And so that is one of the perks of being in heaven. It's not very heavenly at all. But so you don't feel that, oh, there are all these limited beings who are not enlightened. No, I realize Brahman and Brahman alone exists. All these limited beings and the not realization is an appearance. It's not that they are not enlightened, they're not free. They are free because they are Brahman. I know. They are pretending not to know. That's all. That's the only difference. After samadhi, I get this insight. I am the witness consciousness. I am the one reality in all beings. All beings are in me. Then it is not dependent on the samadhi anymore. Whether this particular mind goes into samadhi, arises from samadhi, is restless, is at peace, I am ever the same. Not a body-dependent enlightenment, not a mind-dependent enlightenment, not a samadhi-dependent enlightenment. That is true enlightenment. That is Advaitic enlightenment. How are we doing for time? Almost gone. It's a big topic. I'll just touch upon it and then I'll stop. Sama-darśhanaḥ, literally it means seeing the same Brahman everywhere. But the word darshana is also the word for philosophy in India. And it also means seeing. So the meaning of philosophy in India is seeing. I mentioned it in other contexts, but let me repeat it here. What I want to say is this. First of all, when we were taught philosophy as novices, we were always taught Western philosophy is philosophy, love of wisdom, philosophia, and Indian philosophy is darshana, seeing the ultimate reality. And these two are different. So Western philosophy is thinking about subjects of philosophical interest. But no, I have mentioned this earlier also. I read this in a book by Luc Ferry in the History of Thought, which is a sort of a French introduction to Western philosophy. There he says philosophy is not the right term. The right term is theory. And then he etymologically derives theory as theos, oran, or something like that, which means seeing the ultimate reality, seeing the divinity, or seeing the ultimate reality. It's exactly the same meaning as darshana. So darshana, seeing the Brahman everywhere, but also philosophy. Now, the point I want to make here is, in all Vedantic texts, you will find many philosophical viewpoints are discussed. Why are they discussed? And how does it help you to come to the Advaitic realization? So this Swami, who I'm quoting, Akhandananda Saraswati, he says, it is actually important to get a general idea of these philosophical viewpoints and see why they are not right, or what is the particular perspective from which they are speaking, and rise above that. If you don't, he says, I've seen many people in my life who, after studying a little bit of Vedanta here, a little bit of this and that, finally slip back ultimately to a gross materialistic perspective, because they have not evaluated these philosophical perspectives. Materialist perspective is a perspective, but it's a perspective. You have to see from what point of view it is said, and what are its limitations, and how Advaita helps you to come up, rise above that. I remember when I was a novice, another brahmachari, another novice monk, very brilliant young man, once he confronted me with this question: why do we study the Charvakas, the Mimamsakas, the Buddhists and the Jains and the Sankhyas? Have you ever come across a Mimamsaka on the street outside who catches hold of you and attacks non-dualism? No. For the most part, these are all dead and gone in dusty old books. They don't exist in modern life anymore. So why study them? The reason, that the young monk told me, the reason is, there is a Charvaka within us. There is a subjective idealist, Vijnanavada Buddhist within us. There is an emptiness philosopher, Shunyavadi, within us. And unless these aspects are addressed, understood, and transcended, they will bug you. They'll come back. The Americanism, they'll come back to bite you, and later on in philosophical life. There are any number of intellectuals, people who have studied philosophy, Vedanta and all, and sort of remain some kind of materialist. So darshana, sama-darshana, you have to rise above this. What I was going to say is, I just indicate it and stop. There is no time. Shankara, Advaitin, he criticizes the Buddhist Vijnanavadin. What is this all about? Swami Vivekananda says in one place, the ancient battle between the realists and the idealists, in ancient India, this is being played out all over again in the West. So Bishop Berkeley's subjective idealism, everything is in the mind. And the realists who say, no, there's an external real world outside the mind. This battle between realists and idealists, it was an ancient battle in India more than 1,000 years ago. The Hindu dualists, like the Nyaya philosophers, Vaisheshika philosophers, who were realists. The world exists outside your mind. Yes, you have a mind. In your mind, there are thoughts. But there are entities outside the mind. This is your own body for one. There are other people, there are other objects, there's the universe out there. And your thoughts are about that universe. But the universe doesn't exist in your thought. It has its independent existence. A common sense approach, you might say, which is very fashionable today because of the prestige of science, and also idealism is out of fashion, and realism is in fashion these days. What did the idealist say? The idealist says that everything is in the mind. Look, every experience that you have is in the mind. You cannot leave the mind out of any experience. And because you've had no experience ever, it's impossible to have an experience without the mind. Then you have no right to speak about objects existing apart from the mind. Even if they do exist, there's a subtle distinction. Even if they do exist, you have no access to them. Only thing you have access to are the contents of your own mind. Think about it, is it true or not? So this was Bishop Berkeley's big thing, subjective idealism. And 1,000 years before Bishop Berkeley, more than 1,000 years, the Buddhist Vijnanavadis, they said this. And there's a huge, centuries-long debate between the Hindu realists and the Vijnanavadis. You would expect Shankara, being a non-dualist, Advaitin, to be sympathetic to the Buddhist idealist. Because, after all, what does Advaita say? Just now we read, all the self in all beings in the self. Aren't you saying the entire universe is appearing in consciousness? The Buddhist is just saying a variation of the same thing. No. Shankara takes up the Buddhist idealist and subjects it to a very forensic analysis. Every argument of the Buddhist is taken apart. And Shankara uses very realist arguments. He seems to say there is a real world outside your mind. The world is not a creation of your mind. And they are beautiful arguments. I was just reading, it's coincidence that I'm talking about it today. I was reading a paper by Professor Arindam Chakravarti, The Idealist Refutation of Idealism. So Shankara, being an idealist, he refutes the Buddhist idealism. But why? And why am I bringing it up here? Why does he refute the Buddhist idealist? Because there's a huge mistake one might make. Go back to the dream example. Let's forget that we don't know it's a dream. You are in your own dream. You're walking around, meeting people. Things are good and bad are happening, and you don't know you are dreaming. Now, what is the experience like? There are people there. There are objects there. There's a virtual dream world. You don't know it's a dream world, and you are there. There's the person. In Sanskrit, they call it Swapna Purusha, the person in the dream who's walking around, interacting. A lot like our modern virtual environments. You are introduced into a virtual environment and it's there. Now it feels like there is a world outside and I am here. Here is my body. Here is my mind. And there's a world outside. Now, it is not true for that person to claim that this world outside is in my mind. It's not. This person and this person's mind and the world he's inhabiting, the whole thing is in the dreamer's mind. But not that this particular person's world is in his own mind. The dream individual and the dream world is not in the dream individual's mind. It's in the dream individual and the dream world are both in the dreamer's mind. Similarly, come back to the waking world. It's not that the waking world is a creation of Sarvapriyananda's mind. Not at all. In that sense, Shankara, Advaita Vedanta accepts the realist position, but goes further and says the so-called real world and this individual who is experiencing the real world outside, not just mind, real world there. The whole thing is an appearance in consciousness, which I, the individual, really am. So this thing Shankara wants to prove. He doesn't want to say that the world is a figment of your individual imagination. No. So sama-darśhanaḥ. You realize the one reality behind everything, and through this approach. What will be the result of this? We will see next. The 31st verse, 30th and 31st verse, we'll see. I think we just saw the 29th verse. 30th, 31st verses, we'll see. And then the 32nd verse is very interesting. You will see it is what is called the golden rule. It's there in all religions of the world. It's one common, the highest teaching of all religions, highest ethical teaching of all religions, and it's found in all religions. And here in Hinduism, we'll find it here in the 32nd verse. It's there in the United Nations. If you go to the 3rd floor of the headquarters, UN headquarters, there's a half-ton mosaic which shows the golden rule. Treat others as you would have them treat you. And here the golden rule is derived from Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta. So that we'll see. All right. Sorry for this long rant. I really like this this verse. So Prabir Basu says, Bhagavad Gita 5:18, which also talks about sama-darśhanaḥ. It's the same thing. The same theme comes up multiple times in the Gita. Dima says, if I understood correctly, in order to experience itself, higher self needs enlightened jiva, then why such a precious entity dissolves after the death of the physical body? No. You as pure consciousness, you are experiencing yourself throughout the entire universe. You see, in our state, it seems like that Brahman, pure consciousness, whatever you call it, needs me to experience itself. Actually, it's the other way around. I need it to experience anything at all. To give anything existence and to illumine anything at all, I need it, we need it. It does not need any of us. It's perfectly all right in the, when the entire universe collapses, pralaya, and there's no universe, there's no bodies, minds, no living beings, Brahman is perfectly all right. It's no less. And when the entire universe is there, and all this is going on, Brahman hasn't increased an iota. It's the same infinity. Rick says, some say that things only come into existence when someone perceives them. I think you're saying Vedanta disagrees with that. In general, yes. So I have to be careful here. In general, yes, Vedanta disagrees with them. Vedanta says, just treat it as your common sense approach. Things exist, you experience them, and then that gives you the experience of things. But you, the experiencer, and the existing things are none other than the underlying Brahman. So in that sense, they are all one reality. So that's why the two-level truth is important. But why am I careful here? There is a flavor of Vedanta which says exactly what you just said. Things pop into existence only because we perceive them, exactly like the dream. So in dreams, what happens? Things pop into existence because we perceive them in the dream. Otherwise, they don't exist. The moment you stop dreaming, everything pops out of existence. So that particular flavor of Vedanta called Drishti Shrishti Vada, and the name is very evocative. Seeing is creation. The Vada means the position that seeing is creation, perceiving is existence. It's very much like subjective idealism. But here, it's not the mind. Both mind and the world, they pop into existence because you are this one consciousness. But when this consciousness is not objectifying things, the objects don't exist anymore. And that is a sub-school, a very radical kind of Vedanta. And if you pursue it a little further, you will see it leads straight to what is called Eka Jiva Vada, that there is only one being, only one sentient being. There is only one. See, when you're dreaming, you are there and there are many people in the dream, but when you wake up, you realize there was only really one person in the dream, you, the dreamer. And all those persons in the dream were in your dream. You were only one, and among them, you were only one. So in this, all of us sitting here, and the 7 billion people on this earth, presumably, and billions of other beings, who is that one being who's dreaming all this? When that one being stops dreaming, we'll all disappear because we don't exist other than that being. Who is that? Who's that guy? And Advaita says, it's you. Which you? Any one of you. But then how can it be? Then there's so many of us. No, there's only one of you. Why this? Why are these separate philosophies there? Which one is true then? Is seeing is creation true, or creation exists before seeing? None of them are true. You have to see the Vedantic position. None of them are true. The Vedantic position is that things do not come into existence. Nothing has ever come into existence. Brahman is the only thing that ever which can be said to exist, or it is existence itself. That's the only truth. To realize that truth, we have these different pathways, these tracks. These are methodologies. They are not claimed to be the truth. Do things come into existence when I perceive them, or do they exist before I perceive them? Advaita actually will say neither. Neither has anything come into existence when you perceive them, nor do things exist when you do not perceive them, because nothing exists at all except Brahman. That's Advaita's position, actual position. And all of these, the rest, because we are a little nuts, the Advaita comes down to our level and develops these nutty paradigms according to the flavor of nut we like, and then guides us back to that reality. These are called prakriyas, methodologies, algorithms. Kalpana says, after understanding this and being fully convinced about oneness, how to make this experience mine. That is the whole technique. Purification of the mind, concentration of mind, then the study of Vedanta, which will lead to illumination. Patrick says, can you explain again the difference between everything is consciousness and everything is nothing other than consciousness? Right. So everything is nothing other than consciousness means consciousness alone exists. But when you say everything is consciousness, it means somehow everything exists and sort of made up of consciousness. It's not that there are things and they are made up of consciousness, or consciousness, that God is all beings. This is that famous poem Mary Hale wrote to Swami Vivekananda. I have understood what you taught. You have taught that everything is God. Swami Vivekananda wrote back saying that I've never taught such strange doctrines that everything is God. And she was stunned. She said, you said it. I said, no, what I said was God only is, everything is not. Another way of saying this is everything is nothing but God, or everything is nothing but consciousness with a capital C. Rodrigo says, each Veda is a text and also a deity and its Shakti. Yes, Vedic mantras are texts with deity and Shakti. In Vedanta, the Mahavakyas are super compressed information, a particular teaching of the best of a particular Upanishad, and we actively do Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. Is there any value in a mechanical japa of Mahavakya? So japa, repetition. No. Repetition of a Mahavakya will, at the most, will help you to remember the Mahavakya. But Mahavakya means that thou art, I am Brahman, like that. It is meant to be realized, not repeated. Repetition is part of meditation. Repetition is part of japa. And Mahavakya is part of jnana, knowledge. A very nice story in this regard. Swami Sarvapriyananda, whom many of you know, he gave a talk here. He's the head of our university in India. So when he was a young monk, he just got his ordination as a monk, Swami Gambhiranandaji, in fact, the one who has translated these Upanishads, Swami Gambhiranandaji was the president of the order, and he had given ordination to that batch of monks where Swami Sarvapriyananda became a monk. And so they received the Mahavakya. In our tradition, it is Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. This is from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. So this was one of the questions, exactly this question, which Rodrigo has asked. This question was asked by some of those newly minted monks to the president, to the guru. And there the system is, all of you don't get to speak. You have a spokesperson. So Swami Sarvapriyananda was a spokesperson who you give your questions to him and he presents it to the master. How many times are we supposed to repeat the Mahavakya, japa? How many times repetition? And Swami Gambhiranji was famously, laconic, very few words. he said, it is not for repetition, it is for realization. Are there any other questions? No, you may go. So famous words. It's not for repetition, it is for realization. Explain. He's not for one for explaining. You understand what is meant. It's a pretty clear statement. But yes, so that you don't forget it. I remember when we got our ordination as sannyasa, something like this came up. Somebody asked, so how many times should we repeat these particular mantras, including the Mahavakya? And Swami Ranganathanandaji, who gave us sannyasa, I still remember, he was very casual about it. He said, 3 times, 10 times, 12 times. And we had a novice master who guided us through this, who was very strict. He knew that we were such lazy fellows. So he told the Swami, please say 108 times. We had to make him say it so that it becomes a commandment for the rest of us. Because he was afraid we will forget the whole thing. Why was he so casual? Because it's not the point of repetition, is not the point. For a mantra, you must repeat. Don't forget. Never mix these two up. A mantra has to be repeated. Otherwise, there's no power in it. I mean, there's a power, but it will not work until you repeat it. Its power comes from repetition. Meditation has to be repeated. Mantra has to be repeated. Knowledge has to be generated. Knowledge has to arise. Parul says, I am in you, you are all in me, is often misused by novice learners like me to not own some uncomfortable truths about myself and seek solace. And it's not me, it's I. I believe there's a paradox after this. Please, what do I keep in mind in analyzing myself and my reactions to others who are on a very different path? Yes. So this particular person, once you realize this oneness, from that perspective, you can deal with this person. The person who is Parul, you can deal with this person, the ups and downs, the quirks, the individual eccentricities of that particular mind will be pretty clear to you. And because you know deep inside, I am not limited to being just Parul, you'll be able to deal with the problems of Parul much more effectively. See, the likes and dislikes of Parul, the fears of Parul are not your own, but they are still there at that level, at the Parul body, mind, and that personality, and you can deal with them. You can try to rise above them, purify the mind, discipline it, analyze, and see what can be done. All those things become much easier to be if you go through this process. If you are centered in this, all beings are in me, I am in all beings, you're centered in oneness. Shweta Sinkiti says, can you explain this in respect of Eka Jivavada? As you noticed, that question Rick asked, that leads to Eka Jivavada, that there is one Jiva, one sentient being. Remember, that's a radical kind of Advaita. I would recommend you not go down that particular rabbit hole. It's pretty suited to monks living by themselves. You can see why they would come up with something like that. Notice that Shankaracharya generally does not teach that. The traditional teaching of Advaita Vedanta, the mainstream, Gita, for example, Upanishad commentaries, they are all much more mainstream, and they accept that there are many jivas. Why do they do that? Because it's a much easier way to start off. That's our common sense approach. I am the only being. Then you begin to treat this waking world as a dream. There can be damaging consequences of that for people who are not ready to face it. Kiran says, you mentioned everything is consciousness and can be proven logically. Are you referring to the logical steps you went over in your talk on non-dual meditation? Yes. Also, there's a talk I gave recently in Santa Barbara. I think all beings in the self in all, exactly like this thing. 7 steps I delineated. Start with absolute material reality, and you end up with consciousness alone. 7 steps. I have explained them step by step there. This was in Santa Barbara just a few months ago. Yes. Shweta says, then Eka Jivavada may be the shortest way back to Brahman. Yes. And even higher than that is the Ajatavada. But the higher the route, the more uncomfortable and scary and prone to slipping and falling, and dangerously close to insanities also it is. So you have to be careful there. All right. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Shri Ram Krishna Arpanamastu.